All right, welcome. Super excited to have Barbara Gross, Warner Leland here to talk about sexual behaviors, sex ed skill sets, scope sequence, I think a lot of different things. So thank you all for being here. And for anybody who's watching afterwards, links are in the description. We're going to share everything, all right? So go ahead and take it away.
Cool. Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah.
In just a second, I'm going to minimize these videos. All right, so welcome. This is Scope It Out. We're going to be talking about building your scope, assessing your scope as it pertains to sex education. So a little bit about Barb and myself. Barb is a Master of Education, Master of Arts, Board Certified Behavior Analyst, Licensed Behavior Analyst in the state of Missouri, and is a Certified Sex Educator through AASECT, which is the American Association of Sexuality Educators, Counselors, and Therapists. Barb is one of the few behavior analysts in the entire world who holds this dual certification, and we are so lucky to have her both here with us right now and also currently at the helm of the Sexual Behavior Research and Practice SIG of ABAI. So you can absolutely get connected with us and other behavior analysts doing this work in that way. My name is Warner Leland, and I am a Master of Science, Board Certified Behavior Analyst, and Licensed Behavior Analyst in the state of Missouri. I am in the 5th year of pursuing my via AASECT, so not certified yet, but on that path. And together collectively, we both work with the Sexual Behavior Research and Practice SIG of ABAI, but we also host Sex Ed Continuing Ed. This is a space for folks who wish to gain more competence and more specialized competence in sex education through a specifically behavior analytic lens. And we're going to be talking more about that at the end today. So to start out with, we're going to be talking about sexual behavior issues and questions that come up for a lot of folks. We're going to be talking about what's in your scope already. So even if you do not have a background in sex education in any way, shape, or form, there are definitely things that you can do to support clients. We're going to be talking about the implicit model and behavior analysis. We'll be touching on what's likely outside of your scope when it comes to sexual behavior and relationship behavior. And then we're going to be talking about building those specialized competencies in sexual behavior if you're interested in expanding your scope. So we typically see two core issues that come up for most of us in this field. We tend to work with folks with intellectual and developmental disabilities or with some sort of neurodivergence. And it's so frequent that we see rights being restricted for these populations, and they would not normally be restricted for a neurotypical population, and especially for adults. And we also see unpublished Department of Justice data that suggest that folks with intellectual and developmental disabilities are approximately 7 times more likely than their neurotypical peers to experience sexual assault sometime in their lifetime. There were also case study data out of, I believe, Pennsylvania that took a look specifically at group homes and noted that when it came to sexual assault, they were still seeing these disproportionate numbers of folks experiencing sexual assault sometime in their lifetime, but also that nearly half of the people committing harm or committing some sort of sexual assault were peers in those spaces. So when we think about assault, we want to think about prevention of harm for our clients as victims, but also prevention of them engaging in harm toward others. And there are some things that we do that shape environments that actually allow sexual assault to be more prevalent. This includes compliance training that we do with all ages of learners. It can seem useful in the moment, or we may think that we are doing a service to a client's community by teaching them to follow rules. However, if we're not very, very careful with that, we can see overgeneralization of this skill that actually leads to clients' no's not being taken seriously and their consent and their assent not being taken seriously. We see dependence on others and failure to teach skill sets like hygiene and self-help, leading to increased abuse, communication deficits, a lack of focus on problem-solving skills, specifically inability to report, definitely shapes up this environment for potential for higher levels of sexual assault. And then also difficulty understanding the difference between legal and illegal sexual behavior is also going to be something that's contributing to these statistics. So when we think about what we can do and what you can do, we invite everybody to, first of all, rely on scientific knowledge always. That includes scientific knowledge outside of our field, and that's going to be a huge part of this because we have very little research within our field as it pertains to sexual behavior. But we also ask folks to really consider their own boundaries of competence and only be providing services, teaching, and conducting research within those boundaries of competence. We'll sometimes hear folks say that, you know, behavior is behavior, and so we're competent to handle all behaviors. I would highly recommend shifting away from that mentality because especially with more vulnerable behaviors, especially sexual behaviors and relationship behaviors, we have high potential to do harm to our clients if we're not careful. So asking ourselves, is it in my scope, is something that's going to be really important all of the time. In the field of sex education and sex therapy, there is a model called PLICIT, and this is a hierarchical model that talks about the steps that we might take and in what order for addressing sexual behavior of concern. So first up is permission, just giving a client permission, normalizing, again, based on scientific knowledge, things that they're interested in, that sexual behavior is normal, really pushing back against the infantilization of a lot of our clients. After that comes limited information. This is sex education. After that, we sometimes see specific suggestions. So this might include some sort of functional assessment and programming potentially. And intensive therapy would be more involved functional assessment and then specific programming for behaviors as they pertain to sex, sexuality, or gender identity. So permission, that first step, is something that is a part of all behavior analytic repertoires. This is something that you absolutely can do. It is in your scope to normalize client interests, client sexuality, client sexual behavior. This is something we can think of as an environmental arrangement. So frequently our clients themselves or their communities or caregivers have a lot of rule-governed behavior around what sex should look like, who should engage in it. There are frequently a lot of myths surrounding the neurodivergent and intellectual developmental disability populations regarding sex. And so this is us really allowing folks the opportunity to contact some new rules for their behavior that's actually more rooted in science. When we think about our 7 dimensions, this permission is always going to be applied. It's always going to be pertinent to our environment. When it comes to that behavioral dimension, it may be related to target behavior, but so frequently it's going to be related to behavior of others in the environment and may or may not be directly related to any client target behaviors, especially when we're thinking about giving permission for space around things like sexuality and gender identity. When we consider analytic, this is really going to depend on whether or not this permission is related to the target behavior itself or not. Analysis may not be a part of the permission stage. So when we think about things like using ACT, acceptance and commitment training exercises with parents, you'll know it's typically not the behavior of interest that's being targeted, right? These are like softer skills that allow folks more space to engage with their families, with their communities, with clients. And same here with the permission. When we think about permission, technological is something we're going to want to adhere to. Putting in writing what we're doing and the science that we're relying on is going to be so crucial, especially if you ever have turnover in the caseload. Making sure that there's continuity of care of these soft skills is really, really important. And our permission always should be conceptually systematic. So we'll still be thinking about reinforcement and punishment as it pertains to behavior, and we're always going to be relying on scientific knowledge. We should always be considering generality and making sure that we're building skill sets of folks in the client's environment to grant the same permissions that we would grant one-on-one, or working on the skills to set boundaries. So perhaps like your sexual behavior is not okay in this environment, but you can do it in a different environment. We really want to consider the role that differential reinforcement can play. And this is something that we should always be considering efficacy of. So that permission may also extend to stakeholders as well. Sometimes we just need to give stakeholders permission to give clients more permission to explore themselves as sexual beings in the world. But so frequently we come across folks where this has been punished in their repertoire, and this may require a greater level of intervention. It's really important to note that for the most part, these aren't necessarily going to be billable hours. This isn't direct client work. This is so frequently advocacy work and providing access. And it's so crucial that we don't skip this step for our clients. So we want to make sure that we're promoting our clients' rights, their human rights, for things like dating, sex, and relationships. This can look like making sure we're providing access to opportunity for things like dating, friendship, and touch. So here in St. Louis, we have the Safe Circles Coalition, and there are many meetups that have dating events specifically for neurodivergent populations, and ways to connect with other folks that have similar interests. Some other groups like this include Supported and Loving in the UK and Proud and Included in Chicago. And this is absolutely something you can create in your own communities as well. We want to make sure we're considering access to trusted info, and this can include a trusted adult who clients can ask questions of in their immediate environment, and also access to accurate information. So even if sex education is not going to be specifically within your scope, it is within your scope to provide access to resources, if that makes sense, which can provide accurate and science-based sex education. So amaze.org is a great example of this. This is something that uses predominantly 2D animation and covers a wide range of sexual health topics. We want to be promoting access for physical space for sex. So when we're thinking about living in group homes or living with families, access to privacy can sometimes be a really huge issue. So making sure that our clients are being given access to privacy, whether that be to engage in partnered sex if they have the capacity to consent to do so, or solo sex on their own, that physical space is going to be a really crucial component. We also want to consider access to tools for healthy solo sex, and this is going to be for folks of legal age. So where I'm at right now, that is age 18. That may be different in your state or your country that you're in currently. But whether that be access to sexual tools, sex toys, legal pornography, all of these are things that we frequently see restricted for our clients, often when there's no reason why they should be. We also want to make sure that we are doing our due diligence to have a referral network of folks that are going to be able to provide affirming care, and collaborating with professionals outside of our field, including medical professionals that provide STI testing and reproductive health care. Again, a lot of these access things are things where these aren't going to be billable hours. This is that above and beyond collaborative work that we need to be engaging in to assist folks with separate competencies than our own in providing the services that they're competent in ways that are going to be accessible for our learners. So Barb is going to take it over right now and talk about some things that you can do right now with clients of all ages that may either function as component skills or cusp skills, so that later on in life, even if they're very young, they can be building robust skill sets that will allow them to have more sexual health and relationship health.
Yeah, I love it. When I present on this, a lot of times I'll sort of hearken this to like Glinda the Good Witch, say like, you have the power with it. You've had the power all along. So these are things you all have right now. So some of those things include learning and training, and sometimes changing the environment for the learner in order to reduce instance of abuse, reduce risk of harm toward others, being able to set things up so that potential harms are less likely to be occurring. And then also, like Warner already said, building on those component skills, being able to open the world up to other opportunities. Neat. I love this image. This is great. Super adorable. So one of the things that's super important, and this is also sometimes blows people's minds a little bit, but really starting with young clients, when I'm talking to families, also I advocate for starting very young, we start having these conversations even in infancy, and just naming body parts, normalizing medically accurate terms for the body parts that we have. So I also advocate for teaching not just about the body parts that are on that person, but also the body parts of other people, to be able to normalize sort of what all of the things are. Helps to reduce stigma and shame with your body. It also can help to increase the likelihood that were some kind of harm to occur, if you're more likely to report. There's also evidence that supports that having this kind of information and being able to name those body parts can reduce risk of abuse even before it occurs. I don't have the slides of it. Okay, thank you. Also building knowledge and skills, being able to discriminate between appropriate behavior or behaviors that can be illegal or risk of harming others. So that can include things like physically contacting somebody. So that sort of has a range to it, where it can be physically contacting in a way that's repeated and unwanted. It can be contact with genitals. It also includes indefinitely, it also includes unwanted vocal verbal communication. So that can be repeated phone calls that can be talking about topics when it's not an appropriate setting, person, or topic for that setting. It can also be repeated text communication, emails, all of that stuff. Cannot stress enough how important it is to be working as early and as emphatically as possible on building independence. So this would include things like being able to use the bathroom by yourself. It kind of stands to reason that if you're not in a situation where you have to have your clothes off with another person, the risk of someone being able to engage in some kind of harmful contact in that setting is going to be reduced because there's nobody there. And this picture, I remember, so fun fact, I was looking for just other kinds of things on Boardmaker, and this was there. So we need to stop. Any programming that is in your repertoire where you are working on trying to get someone to do something, and this right here, so I'm going to read it. When I do not do what I am asked, people feel sad. If I want someone to be happy, I do what I am asked to do. I want others to feel happy. So when we move away from this and move toward being able to build self-advocacy, being able to build the ability to advocate for the wants and needs of that person, I mean, please do that. Please do that. Thanks. This also goes hand in hand with, and I'll go ahead and just use the quote that I've heard Sarah Stein use repeatedly, that I believe is attributed to Dave Hingsberger really directly, and it's if you can't say no to peas, you can't say no to a penis. It really is kind of drawing the line between, if you're working with 3, 4, 5-year-olds and you're not teaching that words have power and those words can give someone the opportunity to be able to say what they don't want, this directly draws a line to, as adults, not being able to advocate for autonomy around body. So public and private discrimination. This is a pretty, I don't know, maybe it's just me. This seems like a pretty kind of common sense thing. If you don't know the right place to do things, it's really hard to avoid doing things in the wrong place if there's no other option. So this relates to not just talking about public and private spaces, it also pertains to teaching public and private behaviors. So not simply limiting it to the things that are like overtly sexual behaviors, masturbation, or partnered sexual behavior, but it also pertains to things like having private conversations. There are places where you're going to talk about things that are private. You're not going to do that in front of a big crowd or around your boss or your whatever. It also pertains to behaviors that really, you know, probably are not functionally or topographically related to sex at all, like picking your nose. Another thing that should be happening probably in a private place, because y'all do it, you know you do it. It's okay, you do it in private. Warren already spoke about problem solving, and I think this this has pieces of being able to build skills on how to identify problems, being able to know if something happens, where to go with that information, how to communicate it. Part of why I think this is directly within everybody's skill set is because it pertains to so many other things. Again, this opens up a whole repertoire of behaviors that are going to help across things outside of sexuality. So it's also being able to support job skills, being able to support academic skills. So you teach us one thing, you're opening a lot of world for a lot of skills. Consent education, and I feel like this kind of goes back to that piece of being able to advocate for wants and needs, being able to withdraw assent. It also has to do with being able to identify and appropriately respond to those consent cues from other people. So the idea of being able to identify when consent is given, when it is revoked, being able to gauge all of the verbal and all of the vocal, verbal, and non-vocal verbal behavior that is occurring and co-occurring with consent or lack of consent.
Thanks so much, Barb. Yeah, so as Barb was saying, all of those things are things that are fully within your capacity to work on with clients. And they're things that you can start on very early in early intervention, making sure that clients know that their yes is going to be honored and that their no is going to be honored, and that they're also honoring the yeses and the nos of other people. Is so crucial and goes such a long way. So many of these self-help skills, privacy-related skills, are things that can be taught early on as well, and have age-appropriate norms and goals along with them that you can be building really across the lifespan. So looking at some of these other implicit things and asking, is it in my scope? You can take a look at limited information. This is typically when we talk about sex education. And this one is going to be a maybe. This is going to depend on the type of outside education that you've had. So if you have had access recently to a robust sexual education course, it may be within your scope to adapt some of that for your learners. I would point people to AASECT and their list of requirements for certified sexuality educators, because similar to the way that we have a task list, they also have a task list of things that need to be covered. However, unlike our BACB task list, their task list has items for how to teach, much like we do, but they also have content items, which is something that we're desperately lacking within our field. There's no requirement that you prove competency to be able to work with infants or with youth or with adults, or with sexual behavior, or with toileting skills, or with feeding, any of those sort of topics before you can sit for your exam and gain a certification within our field. There are topic requirements that you have to have specialized knowledge on before you can be certified as a sexuality educator through AASECT. And these are very specialized topics, and they're all incredibly crucial. So I would highly recommend noting that general sex education alone is not enough to necessarily implement sex education teaching ethically and well, and with due concern for cultural humility. So I would highly recommend looking outside of just general sex education if you're hoping to engage in sex education teaching for clients. Specific suggestions. So considering that you may have sexual behaviors or sexual appearing behaviors of harm coming up for clients, this is something that likely is not going to be within your scope. However, the behavior that needs to be taught might be within your scope. So we reference Sarah Stein frequently. This is because she, like Barb, is one of the few behavior analysts in the world that hold this dual certification as a certified sexuality educator through AASECT, and also as a certified sexuality educator supervisor through AASECT. And she noted in a recent journal club that we had at the Sexual Behavior SIG that it's helpful to ask, what behavior are you actually teaching? Is the behavior you're teaching a sexual behavior or sex education? Or is it just a non-sexual behavior? If it's a non-sexual behavior, it might be something that's within your scope. So if you're teaching discrimination between public versus private places, that may fully be within your scope, even if the behavior you're seeing is sexual, something like masturbation. If the behavior you're seeing is something sexual like masturbation and you're wanting to do specific masturbation-related education, that is going to be a sexual behavior and is likely not going to be within your scope. So that's sort of the difference there that we want to look at when we're considering specific suggestions. And then when it comes to intensive therapy, this is going to be specific programming related to either sexual behavior, sexuality, and gender. And again, without like a dual competency, it's very, very unlikely that this is something that is going to be within your scope. You would either need intensive consultation and supervision in an ongoing manner, or you need to be referring out and or collaborating with the person you've referred out to shape programming that's going to be meaningful for your learner. What do I do if I come across something that is not within my scope? So step one, I highly encourage you to join the Sexual Behavior Research and Practice SIG of ABAI. This is an excellent place to come into contact with folks who can provide ethically consultation and supervision in this regard. You can find our website at sbrpsig.org. That is us, and there are links on that page as well to our Facebook page and our Facebook group. Obviously, the internet and social media is not going to be a place to ask for direct consultation or to put client information out into the world, but it is a good place to generally say, hey, I'm seeing some behaviors that I feel like are maybe outside of my scope, or I might need consultation. Who would be available to talk about this general topic? I highly recommend also looking to AASECT's website. They have a member directory, so you can find certified sex educators, counselors, and therapists in your area. So if you're encountering sexual behavior that is clearly sexual behavior with sexual behavior that needs to be worked on and outside of your scope, it is highly likely that it's going to be most ethical for you to refer out to someone else and collaborate with them such that their content can be delivered in a way that's meaningful for your learner. And this is a great place to find someone in your area who may have the competency to do so. So this is available at AASECT, that's AASECT.org. And then also, if you are hoping to build your specialized skill set, this is something that we deeply advocate for and are hoping to see more of as the years go on within our field. As I mentioned, Barb and Sarah are a couple of just a handful of folks in the world that hold this dual certification. And while we do have the potential to collaborate with other helping professionals when we need to refer out, there are so many things when it comes to sexual behaviors, sexuality, gender identity that our clients may wish to work on, which, should we have dual competency, we may be best set up to assist with in the most effective and efficient way. And so building dual competency in this area is something that we highly advocate for. You can head to our website. We are currently waiting to get our AASECT CE providership, so you will note that most of these things are not available yet. Will be available as soon as possible, so that when you contact any of this information, you can get BACB continuing education and at the same time have it count toward an AASECT certification, or if you're already certified, toward those AASECT CEs. So that will be shifting over, and the content will be available as soon as we have received that go-ahead. Hopefully that'll be within the month. However, right now there is a free webinar up there on sexual behavior ethics and AASECT certification that walks you step by step through the requirements for dual certification, whether you wanted to do that through a specific program or through continuing education stuff on the web. And then you can also find a lot of those continuing education resources again, on that AASECT website as well, in addition to this one. So I would recommend checking that out if you have interest, if you are noticing, much like we have, that a high rate of our clients, need assistance or support around sexual behavior, sexuality, or gender identity. You'll note on our site that we have education training courses. So when you AASECT certify, there are two separate areas of competency. There's core knowledge areas. That's that content-heavy education that's needed. And then there's also sexuality education training. And this is going to be how to teach sex ed. And very few folks in AASECT focus on a neurodivergent or intellectual and developmental disability population. So this is specific coursework that does focus on that. There are 5-week classes, 2 hours. There is homework, capstone projects, and a lot more supervision and guidance as far as that content goes, so that you can gain a more focused and robust education that's going to be directly applicable to your clients. So those courses are going to be available this fall and in the coming years. There's also asynchronous content. So this is more sex education training, comparable thing, but these are webinars on demand, so you can watch them on your own time asynchronously and take a little quiz at the end to demonstrate competency. And then we also, from a wide variety of folks, both within our field that hold dual competence and outside of our field, have contributed to these core knowledge areas as well. And that is also available on the website in that asynchronous format. So a wide variety of the core knowledge area topics that are needed for that AASECT certification are there and available to you. And we've really focused on a model which distributes that learning across educators with competence specifically in our field, and also educators with lived experience competence, so that you're getting, again, more robust content as far as that education goes. So I just wanted to make folks aware of these resources if you do have the desire to move forward with that dual competency. Right now, we are going to take a bit of time and we're going to talk about some case conceptualizations. This is also a time if you have questions, a perfect time for us to talk through them. We did have some folks send questions ahead of time, and so we want to talk about them as they pertain to the implicit model. So Barbara's going to go ahead and take the lead on that. And also, if you have questions that you've dropped in the chat box, or if you want to drop questions in the chat box now, this is the perfect time for that.
Cool. So, and Warner, if you want to keep an eye on chat and go
Absolutely.
from there.
Yeah, I'll keep an eye too.
Love it.
Cool.
So what I was thinking would be potentially helpful for folks is some of the questions, and really what was posed to us are things that we've heard before. These are things that are remarkably similar to other questions that we've had. So yeah. What I'm hoping to do is be able to kind of read through and then think through that, again, implicit model, and that should help to kind of outline things that are going to be in your scope and then where you might need to go.
Perfect.
As we're kind of figuring through there. So cool.
And these are the ones that I shared with you prior, right? Cool. Yes. If you can just drop the names, is that okay?
Oh,
yeah. I figured. Just double checking.
Oh, it's all good.
Yeah, thank you. Cool.
Yeah, so I kind of give like a general thing. So the first question was about, so somebody, 12-year-old charged with a sexual assault, making inappropriate sexual comments to teachers and family members. And the question was about what tools could be used to be able to talk to young people in general about sexually appropriate behavior, how to express and explore their sexuality without making them feel uncomfortable, without crossing any boundaries or inadvertently increasing sexual behavior. So again, the implicit model starts with giving permission. There's actually, for what it's worth, an expansion of that model is 2006, Davis and Taylor, and they expanded it, and it's explicit, which says that that permission is freely given across all of it. So sort of as you're working through a case, that you're continuing to be affirming that, yes, please share information, continuing to solicit additional information. Anyway, so things that are probably within your scope. So that P of permission, being able to affirm that like an interest, so 12-year-olds, it would not be uncommon to start having some interest in being able to be like possibly romantically, even sexually interacting with other people, starting to experience sexual urges is not uncommon at that age. And again, I'll never say that it's everybody because it's not. It's also important, I think, to be affirming the concerns that whoever's bringing the question, those are valid concerns that, especially if there are legal charges, that's something to be noting. That's a real thing, and making space for that and having compassion and being with that person when they have those concerns.
Can I jump in really quickly, Barb?
You sure can, please.
The one thing that I would add to that is that this is a space where giving permission is within your scope, but you may not have contact with the data or the scientific knowledge that you should be relying on. So this is an excellent space in which it would be within your scope to disseminate that information, but you would want to be contacting some sort of consultation or supervision, likely just a one-time thing asking for resources.
Yep, and I noted that down, like when I was thinking about like limited information, that part of it is, if you are a BCBA, my guess is that you have some competency in being able to go to research and identify evidence-based practices, being able to look for research and information with a strong enough methodology to be able to say, this is what research is telling us. So, and again, I think there is a place where you can look at the American Academy of Pediatrics, which does publish sort of normative sexual behavior. I think that what they have up now is a little old, but it's still available. And then with other things, limited information, and again, my take on it, and Warner, jump in, tell me if I'm telling lying lies, but I think that it also is being able to point people toward resources that might be helpful, and resources might be looking at websites. So amaze.org is a good one. Scarleteen is another one that I like to share with people, or pointing toward providers. And this is, again, another place where the Sexual Behavior Research and Practice SIG is a resource that you can be either bringing those concerns and looking for some support and consultation, or sometimes even families can be reaching out for those same kind of questions. The specific suggestions, again, this is, I think, almost certainly going to be outside of your scope, but this might mean, if we're talking about sort of problematic, potentially illegal touching of other people, non-consensual touching, that this may warrant a functional assessment, this explicit teaching of replacement behaviors. And again, as Warner said, that the teaching of being able to identify which people under which context, that may be within your scope and it may not. So it's, again, being really careful to think about, is it a sexual behavior? Is it a behavior that's happening around sexuality? The intensive treatment, again, that may be a functional assessment. It really kind of depends on your skill set. So depending on the behavior, you're probably going to be consulting out for that. You're almost certainly going to be consulting out. And then if there are any identified potential traumas, if there's abuse, any other complex risk factors, that those are things where you will really need to be referring out to other people. So that's the first one.
Great.
We got a couple, yeah.
We have some stuff in the chat box
I really want to jump to that.
Awesome.
Ruby.
So the first thing I'm seeing is a question that says, when asking BCBAs about sexuality, I'm often told, this is my advice to you as a friend, but not a BCBA. This seems confusing to me as a person with autism, because I feel the BCBA should be there to help me with my behavior issues and questions. I'm just wondering, does the BACB have some kind of rule that BCBAs shouldn't help with sexual behavior? And if so, why? From my understanding, sexual behavior is social behavior. The entire concept confuses me and hurts me. So great question. The BACB Ethics Code does have some rules. One of those rules is that BCBAs cannot provide you with resources unless you're in a professional relationship with them. So this would mean that you have a contract that there's some sort of billing happening or that you have a pro bono contract. Often your insurance is involved, or if you have access to some other payment resources, or if you're doing private pay, only within that professionally defined context can they actually assist you in that way. That's a part of our ethical code to help prevent any sort of exploitation or abuse of that relationship, or confusion about roles. So especially if a BCBA is your friend, it gets really sticky really quickly if they're acting as a professional and they're acting as your friend. So a BCBA that was your friend would not ethically be allowed to work with you in that professional context. They would have to refer you to someone else. So if you did have a BCBA that you had a professional relationship with, they could potentially work on this with you. But then also we have that question of, is it within their scope? And so they may work with you on sexuality related things or sexual behavior relationship related things as your professional BCBA. However, they might be utilizing someone else with more competency to gain advice, consultation, and supervision from, or they may be collaborating with somebody outside of the field, like a certified sex therapist or a certified sex educator or a certified sex counselor. Yeah, so it's really, there are a lot of hoops. Some of them are really bureaucratic and frustrating when it comes to like insurance and payments and things. Some of them are very protective in terms of those relationships, but those are, I think, the main reasons why you might be seeing something like that being what friends are sharing with you. Barb, do you have anything to add to that?
No, you're good.
Okay.
That was all the things. Mm-hmm.
Great. Okay, let me see if we have anything else in the chat box.
I feel like we as a field are starting to now realize, because of things like y'all are putting out there, of just how complex this is and how much more training is needed for most of the behavior analysts out there, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so we talked briefly before we went on air about it's, I think, a different spot than it was maybe, I don't know, 5-10 years ago, of people thinking everything's behavior, as opposed to, wait, we need to focus more on specific knowledge areas more.
Yeah.
So I think the field's realizing this a little bit more.
When I think that's something that's, maybe unique about sexual behavior, maybe not, but it seems awfully unique to me that the research is ever changing. Especially, I live in this weird little rabbit hole of pornography research. And with that, the research changes at least annually.
Yeah.
Where we're getting new information and it's changing and it's informing the way that we're practicing differently.
Okay.
So.
Nice. Yeah, it's very rapid.
Absolutely. We have a question about toilet training.
All right.
When doing toilet training for kids and teens, I always wear gloves and make sure I tell parents and staff that it's important to wear gloves so no skin-to-skin contact occurs. Is there anything else we can do while toilet training to ensure that we're keeping kids safe and also teaching those boundaries while also still making sure we're competently toilet training?
I mean, the first place I'm going to go is component skills. That I think the best thing that we can do as providers who are building those skills is making sure that we're teaching in a way that reduces the need to be prompting those skills as fast as we can, so that it is going to be a skill that is maintaining over time. And just thinking about some specific cases that I've experienced where, really all it took was adding wait time. And the other thing that I think, and Warner, tell me what you think about this, but something that I think is another important add, other than look at your programming, make sure you're fading your prompts in a way that is efficient, is also teaching the skills so that that person has the ability to advocate for their body boundaries. So in other words, if I'm helping you in the bathroom and you tell me no, I will stop. Making sure that that is actually not just a separate part of a separate skill to teach, but that is part of the toilet training skill. Something we're teaching in tandem with bathroom independence.
Absolutely. So when Barb says component skills, this means that you can be practicing all of the components of toilet training without actually coming into physical contact with the body. You can do a lot of training around this using stand-in models. So whether that be like on a doll practicing what wiping looks like front to back, or there's a very cute video
I say
that's
y'all
going
saw the
around a
video with
year
the
or two ago
balloons.
with the balloons. So if you haven't seen this, it's children in chairs, and there are two balloons taped to the back of the chair that sort of form like a buttocks, and they reach behind the chair and practice wiping front to back in between the balloons. Excellent way to practice those component skills without having to be naked or have any body contact. And so these are all things that we can consider when we're training. When you are doing any sort of assistive care around it, I think the gloves are a huge thing. And also I would recommend that in addition to what Barb was saying about allowing removal of assent anytime within that process, to also be using a trauma-informed approach, the way medical providers are trained to do when doing any sort of body contact. So that means that I am going to tell you what I'm assisting with and why. I'm going to make sure you know the names of the body parts that are being touched, and I'm also going to ask for consent or assent before starting, and also let you know that you can remove your consent before starting, that you can at any time. So all of those are going to go into providing toileting that's going to allow folks the most autonomy and ongoing assent possible during that time.
Yep.
It's
Got it.
new messages. Let's see. Do we have any resources related to parent education, and especially in terms of education for someone whose gender or sexual identity does not match their child's identity? Great question.
So do we have resources related to parent education? Yes. And I'm thinking through the second part of the question. Like literally, I know for a fact we have that one. And I think sometimes it depends on what kind of parent education we're doing, whether it is providing education for families as far as how to support independence, how to be creating an environment that is supportive of, affirming of, and continuing to build skills toward an independent and pleasurable sex life as, you know, as children growing into adults, right? The second part, and this is where when I start thinking about gender identity, what I will typically do as a professional is I am going to refer out and say, hey, Warner, do you want to take the second part of that question? Because you have so much more fluency.
Sure, absolutely. So these resources are listed on the Sexual Behavior SIG website, and we're adding more all the time. So that's absolutely a place that you can go. We do have a specific section regarding talking about sexuality and gender identity. But this is something where I think easy resources that are not necessarily within our fields can be incredibly helpful. Amaze.org is geared toward children and teens, but it's also a great one for parents to watch through before sharing anything. I think that as problematic as the HRC has been in the past, that right now their parent education resources are phenomenal. Planned Parenthood has great resources. I would look at AANE. They have resources specifically related to sexuality and gender identity for autistic folks. The work that I do along with my colleague August Stockwell at Upswing Advocates is also specifically centered around gender identity and sexuality, and are so welcome to provide you with more robust resources if you're looking for something more specified or something more research heavy. Great question.
Yeah.
Right. A couple more.
I had a quick question, which was there's only really a handful of y'all that are dual certified in these areas, right?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so just like a quick overview, because I know there's a lot that goes into it, but like how much time did you have to commit to be able to like chase that down, Barbara?
So I'm a little bit outside of the certification process. I think it's been just a little over a year where certified. So it's 90 clock hours of that core knowledge area stuff. So some of that was from going back, literally going back to college and taking some specific courses, especially around the things that that were not part of my my sexuality education growing up. Which, as a Gen Xer, I didn't have much of a sex education growing up. Like, it was like 5th grade, and there was something about like a Ferris wheel, and like boys and girls were in different rooms. It's very bizarre, and that tends to be pretty common for people. Yeah. So it's 90 clock hours. Some of it was college. Some of it was attending the AASECT conference. Some of it, honestly, I did through attending ABAI. There are some events that the SIG will promote. So always definitely come to us during that time. It counts a little bit differently as far as how many of those hours you can use and how they are weighted, so to speak. And then 60 hours of sex educator training, and half of that has to be specifically about how to do sex ed. So I could count some of my education and background in teacher training, but 30 hours had to be specifically about sex education teaching. And then from there, the numbers of how many supervised hours depends on your degree level. Warner, is that correct? I feel
so
like
the number of supervised hours is going to be consistent. However, the time that you can complete them in is going to be different. So you do need 1,000 essentially practicum hours, practice hours of some sort. However, a lot of things fall under the umbrella of this. So researching all of your research time to create any sort of training or education is going to count as hours. Same thing for if you're writing or disseminating. So there are lots of ways to obtain those hours, but depending on whether you have a bachelor's, master's, or PhD will determine the minimum amount of time that those hours can happen in. So if you have a PhD, you have the potential to fast track that. If you have just a bachelor's, they ask that you spread that out over more time. And for more really robust information on this question, I would point people to that free webinar that we have on our website. It is worth BACB CEs, but we walk you through the entire process of what that looks like.
Perfect. I just know there's a lot of work that goes into something like that.
There is.
The other one I had real quick was, is there, it sounds like AASECT is American focused. Is there international resources or things that you all are aware of? Or am I misunderstanding the breadth of AASECT?
Yeah, AASECT is predominantly, it is US centric, predominantly North American. I've kind of done a little bit of looking around for international equivalents, and I don't know that I have anything that is specifically a certification or a credentialing and being able to look at competency. There are guidances that are outside of the United States as far as things to know and things to include, but not specific on checking and making sure that those competencies are met. Okay,
cool. I'll have to do a little bit of looking around too. I'm always interested. There's a number of people that support internationally and outside the US, so I want to make sure that we had an idea of those. So thank you for.
Yeah. And that's a separate piece too, right? That if I'm communicating to behavior analysts that are outside of the United States, I have to take into account the laws that are different. So if I'm presenting to an audience of Russian BCBAs, their laws are very, very different. There are things that I literally, that I don't present about. There are things where the kind would be different. So that's a separate piece of competency that I don't think we really touched on very much, is being aware of the laws, being aware of the cultures, being aware of religious differences. That's also a super, super important part. So here's what I would say. If it's a BCBA who's looking to support, but doesn't have that competency, partnering with a sexuality educator, a sex counselor, a sex therapist can also be beneficial. And then it's just like any other kind of heavy collaboration with a professional who's not there.
Yeah.
I will note that we do have some SIG members outside of the US. So I know like Landa Fox, for example, is located in Canada and is a certified sexual health educator. and that's through Options for Sexual Health.
Okay.
So that is, I would say, after AASECT and adjacent, one of the more robust programs that also requires heavy knowledge and practicum demonstration for certification.
And then I know there's one other question. Did we hit on it, Chantal? Do any American AASECT providers provide supervision to Canadian BCBAs looking to support clients?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know that anyone would necessarily be a no solely based on location. I know that many of us would not provide, I would say that many folks are cautious to provide supervision in an ongoing manner via telehealth because it's such a challenging thing to account for, like the ethics and legality of observation around. However, consultation, yes, absolutely. And also I would definitely recommend getting in touch with Landa as well, who is based and has that specified certification for Canada.
That's what I was just thinking. Yep.
Great question.
Cool. I think there's one or two more that I may miss. I've been trying to keep up. Maggie was asking, is this an open educational resource? Like, is it downloadable and shareable, or do you just point to the website for the free?
Yeah, just point to the website.
Okay, perfect. And then I think you touched on the one about training opportunities for people that are not working face-to-face. So cool. Nice. Yeah, I feel like Chantal was saying that, you know, people are so busy that are in this such a rare breed, the folks that have these dual certifications, right? It seems like, I guess if I had anything to say, it's just, it sounds like an immense amount of work, an immense need, an area that we're direly lacking in behavior analysis. And so thank you for those that are forging forward. But also when you reached out originally, Warner, about what you all have been building here, this is a lot of work. Like, this is a lot of time that you all have been putting in. So I think we need to like praise you all for stepping into this and just trying to tackle this. It's insane. You built so much. So like, thank you.
Oh, that's very tender. Thank you.
Yeah.
There is a final question here that I would love to address if we have just a moment.
Yeah.
So a final question about our opinions on sex surrogacy. And this is an awesome question. I know that a lot of the questions we got sent in ahead of time were from folks outside of the US in countries where sex surrogacy is legal. And I think that's a beautiful thing. I will always point people to the legalities of their own countries and states. Please get fluent with your own local law. There's such potential for harm. I see behavior analysts all the time making recommendations that sound on the surface really ethical, but are actually illegal for their clients based on where they're at. So it's so crucial that you maintain adherence to the law. So here in the US, I could not ethically and legally advise specifically sexual surrogacy. However, there are so many forms of legal touch-based therapy that I think are so crucial. And when we think about, you know, motivating operations, if we want to get like a little bit behavior analytic with things that we're considering, those touch-based needs and the protective factors, you know, physically, mental health wise, for folks contacting touch, I think are really crucial. So to the degree that we can recommend things like access to massage, access to just things like hugs and cuddling from folks either that are in your environment that are comfortable with it, or there are many organizations that offer professional cuddling. So there are things like Cuddle Party or Cuddle List in most states in the US, where folks provide non-sexual surrogate touch. And it's also very focused on consent-based education as well. So I think to the degree that you can contact that, that can potentially be a really phenomenal resource. Barb, anything to add?
Cool.
Nope. You did it.
All right.
Cool. Thank you. Feeling more knowledgeable. Is there any final, anyway, I got to get wrapping up because I got to pop into something that starts right about now. So I just want to say thank you again one more time, and then see if there's any final praise, comments. And then if people have additional follow-up questions, is there you've pointed to resources, would there be an email potentially that you want to point to, or do you just want to point to the websites?
Absolutely. So we have a contact form that's available in the website, and you can also reach us at sexedcontinuinged@gmail.com, and I will just drop that into the chat box right now.
Awesome. You rock. So I'm going to catch both y'all tomorrow. We'll do a little bit of close up here and talk about, I'll put a closing post together, and we'll make sure that we get something that, in addition with the video, has like everything out there. So I just want to make sure that we get together tomorrow to like finalize, so I point to all the right resources.
Cool.
And really appreciate it. I feel like I learned something today, so thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. Cool. To everyone that showed up, thank you. And